So we're here again with our good friend Steve Martin, and I wanted to ask a question, and I'm going to ask this of a few people that I know in the industry because I'm curious to get different perspectives on it. Recently, a company that we both worked for, Palo Alto Networks, started this big debate about what is a platform. And you and I have worked for different companies. We've had a couple tours together as well. And I think there's an interesting perspective of what is a platform. Is the platform down to when we were at CrowdStrike, it was one UI, one agent, or can the platform be far more where we're talking about potentially a Palo Alto Networks or another company such as that? Cisco doesn't really matter, with multiple GUIs, multiple agents, etc. So I guess I'm curious on your perspective, knowing that all the companies you've worked for, Juniper, Palo Alto Networks, endpoint companies, how you perceive this. What do you think the platform is today?
That is a great question, Darren. And I think I've been around for a while, right? You and I have been at this for a few years, right? And I would say that maybe it's been I've been hearing of platform maybe for the last 5, 6, 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think it came about because like back in the days, I remember when I worked at Juniper Networks, right? We were like very focused on one specific technology when I was there, right? And right, so customers would buy a firewall, for example, right? And then we knew there was always as well, budget for other technology to secure their environment or to provide, and all that. And I think what we started seeing, right, in like the early, 2010s to 2015 is that customer had many different solutions, right, to manage their right? They had firewalls from vendor A, right, and they had AV from vendor B, and they had a SIM from another vendor. And I think what started happening is that customers were starting to, having many different relationships as well, right? Because you have a relationship with these vendors, right? Like you have your relationship with your account manager, your SE for your SIM. You have a relationship with your account manager, your SE for your firewall, SIM for your endpoint. And I think from a customer point of view, right, it's time consuming, right? Because you have to maintain these relationships, right? You have to evaluate constantly, and it's getting more and more complicated. I think what I saw, some vendors starting looking at this as like, what, our customers are struggling with having to maintain all these relationships and having to find a way to correlate all of this data as well, right? Like SIM, initially when SIM came out, it was supposed to be the solution to bring this all together, right? And it's going to be the easy solution, but the reality is you still are dealing with all these other vendors. Right? Sure, you've got centralized, metadata detections and all that, but in reality, you still have a lot of these different components, and they all need updates at different times, right? They have, different cycles, different updates. So we started seeing vendors wanting to address this problem for customers and say, hey, Mr. Customer, instead of you having to maintain 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different vendors and relationship and update cycles and upgrade and all this, maybe if we bring the concept of a platform on which you base all of your technology based on our platform. And now not only the data is integrated and correlated, but also the management of all of this and the cycles, and you only have to deal with one SC and one account manager maybe instead of 8 of them, right? So to me it's a bit more than technology. It's more like, let's have this relationship with our customers where we provide them a platform and we're able to make this easier for them and from the integration.
If a platform has multiple GUIs, multiple management, is that meaning that it's really sharing the data? Or is the customer getting that correlation out of the data? And maybe this is where XDR comes in, right?
Yeah, that very good. And I got a very good point. And I don't know that, to me, platform is necessarily just one UI, right? I think, I think what we see as well is that companies that really want to bring the concept of the platform often, they're not reinventing every single technology, right? So we see that it's quite common, I think, to see this in our industry where there's, acquisition, right? So company A is going to buy company B, and then they they start integrating the signals. Eventually, they want to get into, the UI, in the same tool. But this takes time, right? So if you ask me, the platform, ideally, yes, it would be all in the same UI, but I think it's very common that we see vendors providing this platform, but still leveraging, multiple UI or source of information.
Yeah, and that's what when I first heard the conversation that came out of the Palta networks and they made the announcement about platform, I was kind of taken back by it a little bit and had to think about it because I was like, coming from the CrowdStrike days, both us worked together at CrowdStrike, we were so used to one UI and one sensor that goes down. It sure makes things a lot easier. And when they do add acquire technology or create new technology, it doesn't take long before you can't tell what was created internally versus externally.
Yeah.
That being said, doesn't mean that the other approach is really not the right approach or doesn't work. And I think XDR has changed a lot of that now too. Like SOAR, having everything orchestrate together. I used to be a little critical of some companies that you buy just okay technology, but it was all automated. You had to buy the whole but that ecosystem has really paid off when it comes to XDR now, right? Because everything is talking together, everything is correlating together.
Absolutely. And you know what I find? I find that, like, if you're talking to a security vendor today, they're all going to talk about XDR. And XDR means different things from all these different vendors, right? So what is XDR? How do you implement XDR, right? And so I think it's really important for customers to do their due diligence on, what are you looking for, right? In XDR, like, what is the pain point you're trying to address, right? Because company A's XDR could be very different than company B XDR. So X means X is a variable, right? It's in the name.
Yeah.
X is a variable, right? So it could be anything, whatever you want it to be, right?
But what you're really alluding to is two of the things I've been saying in pre-sales engineering since I started is make sure you're comparing an apple to an apple, like not an apple to an orange. And the devil's in the details. Everybody could say they do XDR, but you got to understand how they've implemented it and where the differences are. And a great example of that is you got this whole, open XDR, native XDR. They're very different who they allow in. Some work within the ecosystem, which is their technology partners like CrowdStrike and a Zscaler, etc. But that doesn't mean that a CrowdStrike would integrate necessarily with maybe a competitor like Palo Alto Networks. It depends on they've made those integrations. They want to make those integrations from the beginning. So it's not an easy thing to understand. XDR, I thought, was supposed to make things easier, but devil's in the details. Make sure you understand what you're getting.